Hello, welcome back to Prospect, Kentucky on Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. We're a good month into our healthy at home Corona self-isolation. We have our lights lit green in commemoration of all those who have suffered from this coronavirus. And welcome back to another edition of Bourbon and Books with the Doctor. I'm Dr. Andrew DeGruccio, orthopedic surgeon and amateur mixologist. And just as I promised you on my last video, tonight is a special video, our old-fashioned video. The reason why I consider this a special video is because the old-fashioned became the official cocktail of Louisville, Kentucky in 2015. And so it represents a lot to me, and I want to do it justice. So to do this cocktail justice, we're going to show you 3 variations of the cocktail and give you a lot of history of the cocktail. And then we'll combine this with a couple of good books to go along with it. So let's go through the history of this. Remember in one of my previous videos on the Sazerac, we talked about how the Sazerac Distilling Company indicated that they owned the rights to the first American named cocktail from 1830s. That was the Sazerac. Well, the history of the old-fashioned goes back further than that, to 1806. In New York, a reader of a monthly or weekly periodical wrote a letter to the editor asking them to clarify what the definition of a cocktail was. And the editor defined a cocktail in 1806 as a concoction that had 4 main ingredients: a spirit, bitters, sugar, and water. Essentially, the main ingredients that defined an old-fashioned. Now, at that time, they probably didn't call that cocktail the old-fashioned. In fact, a whiskey sling or a sling was the general name used for the most part. So let's go over the very traditional definition of an old-fashioned. So a traditional old-fashioned, you'll use an old-fashioned glass. We'll use that there. And the first ingredient is a sugar cube. Take a sugar cube, good luck finding those these days, and drop that right into the bottom of your glass. Next, you take your Angostura bitters, and what you're going to do is you're going to blast that sugar cube with bitters, a good soaking of the sugar cube. Then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take a little water, just enough to help start dissolving that sugar cube. Not much. And then you're going to muddle that sugar cube into the actual glass. Add a little bit more water if you need to help dissolve some of those sugar particles, and just keep working that together. Essentially, you're creating your own syrup within the glass. After you're done with that, you can take a nice solid ice cube, and you're going to take your bourbon. Now, the traditional old-fashioned calls for whiskey. It could be Canadian whiskey, rye, bourbon, or brandy. But we'll be using, of course, bourbon today. So we'll go ahead and pour out 2 ounces of our Buffalo Trace. And pour that right into our mixture. That, after a good stir, is the traditional old-fashioned. Now, in those days, there wasn't necessarily an indication for a garnish, but we'll go ahead and garnish with a citrus, orange peel, and there you go. That's your traditional old-fashioned. Now, this is where the cocktail gets controversial, because it was in 1881 in an exclusive club in downtown Louisville named the Pendennis Club on 2nd and Muhammad Ali, where they then decided that they altered the traditional old-fashioned recipe and spruced it up a bit, and they created the modern old-fashioned which ultimately became the official cocktail of Louisville. So now let's make the new Old Fashioned or modern Old Fashioned. So the difference in a modern Old Fashioned is we're going to muddle some fruit right into our cocktail. So what we're going to muddle into this cocktail is a cherry. We'll throw one of those into the glass. And an orange. Now this is a key element of the modern Old Fashioned. If you take a traditional orange slice and just throw it in there and muddle it, and you muddle too much of the peel, the cocktail may be too bitter because of that. So one trick I would recommend is cut the peel off and muddle the orange this way. Now, you want to take about 2 tablespoons of simple syrup, which I took from our simple syrup that we have used in multiple other videos, and we'll add to that. And we want to hit that also with our Angostura bitters. Now, we're going to muddle that together. So now we're muddling a cherry, a slice of orange, simple syrup, and Angostura bitters. Now what you see that I'm not doing is muddling this in the glass. And that's where the second controversy comes with the modern Old Fashioned. And we'll go ahead and we'll do 2 ounces of our bourbon. Oh, we've just finished off our Rebel Yell. So 2 ounces of that. And again, I don't believe we need to shake this cocktail. We'll just give it a good stirring. But the controversy is many bars will serve this cocktail with the muddled elements in the glass. So I've asked bartenders all over Louisville at some of the best restaurants and bars, do you leave the muddled cherry and orange in the glass or do you strain it out? And most of the bars at the high-end bars in town say the traditional cocktail calls for it to be strained. That's how I prefer to serve my modern Old Fashions. So what we'll do next is we'll strain this into our glass. And I've put one of my square ice cubes in there, and you see how that fills the glass very nicely. Now, for garnish on that, we'll take another citrus or orange peel essence and put that in there. And a cherry on that ice cube would be nice as well. So that is the modern Old Fashioned with muddled fruit in the glass, so you get a lot of that orange and cherry essence mixed with the cocktail. So last but not least, I'd like to point out that there are a lot of other variations of Old Fashions. There are now a lot of flavored liqueurs that have that sweetness, floral, and citrus elements in them, and they can combine the need for muddling fruit and the syrup right into one ingredient. So it can make an Old Fashioned very easy. So our next Old Fashioned that we'll make is going to be called the Elder Fashioned. And what we'll do for this one is we'll take 2 ounces of bourbon. In this case, I'm using my Buffalo Trace. And we're going to take about a ½ ounce of St. Germain elderflower liqueur. This is a 40 proof liqueur that is a French type of liqueur, but it has a floral sweetness to it that will make for a special cocktail. And then to that, I'm going to use some orange bitters. Since we're not using a muddled orange, will provide an essence of orange with the bitters. So we'll give that a good stirring into our chilled glass. We'll take one of our large square ice cubes. We can take our orange peel essence, rub it around the edges, put that right next to your ice cube, and pour that right over your ice cube. And there's your elder fashion. So that's an old fashioned, simply using a liqueur, but it has a very similar taste, more floral than citrusy, but a very simple way to make an old fashioned. So that's the elder fashioned, the modern old fashioned, and the traditional old fashioned. My preference would probably be the modern old-fashioned. So in any case, those are some of the controversies in history of the old-fashioned, but there are variations. Feel free to try different spirits. You can use brandy, rum, bourbon, rye, Canadian whiskey, any variety of bitters will do, different forms of citrus or syrups. You've got regular sugar cubes, brown sugar cubes, honey and maple syrup, and all of those can be used to make an old-fashioned. All right, so now let's move on to our books. Since I have 3 cocktails to drink, I'm going to introduce 2 books. And for these books, I would go into a very heady topic, and that is our jurisprudence system and how it handles female victims in our country of the United States, including rape and domestic violence. So my first book is called A False Report. This is a fantastic book, and it was the basis of a terrific series on Netflix called Unbelievable. And it's a story about one of our more prolific serial rapists of the United States, who went on a multi-year, multi-state rape spree, all of which could have been stopped if the police had listened to and taken seriously a young lady who was raped at the very beginning of this spree. But instead of listening to her, they charged her with filing a false report, turned her into the criminal, and the community around her vilified her. Many years later, with terrific detective work, they found this perpetrator and found evidence that proved that this young lady had been vilified for no reason. So this is a really good book. Has great detective work. It's almost a CSI type of book, but also goes through the entire history of our court system and jurisprudence system and how they've treated women in court for many years. To go with that, I'm also going to recommend a book I just finished called Spilled Milk. This is the author's recounting of their personal experience with domestic violence and abuse and incest and rape in her own family, and how she became victimized also in the court systems and by the system in general. And it took many years for her to overcome this tragedy that ruined her and her family, and now she's become an advocate for victims as well. So these 2 books together will teach you a lot about our criminal court system and how they handle female victims of crime in our country. So in any case, this concludes our special edition of Bourbon and Books with the Doctor, old-fashioned edition. Again, we're about a month into our Healthy at Home, coronavirus home isolation. Make yourself some good cocktails. Enjoy them with a good book. And we've probably got about 2 more weeks minimum of this isolation. So be patient with yourself and everyone else. Stay isolated, social distance, wash your hands, and light up your house green in remembrance of those that have already passed from the coronavirus. Salud.